Hey! Hello, happy Tuesday. Well, it's Tuesday for me. It is going to be Wednesday at the earliest from you. And my friend Sal wanted to say hi today. Also, I spent like 2 hours yesterday trying to troubleshoot this problem I was having with music in the background, and then after 2 hours of blood, sweat, and tears, the grand solution was I closed the app and reopened the app, and then everything worked. So what that basically means is that if at any point in time my computer decides to shake his fist at the world, then weird stuff might be happening with the music I think is playing in the background. It may not be. I have no idea. Anyway, I hope you've had a good, day since the last time I spoke to you. Alright, so we're gonna jump into this. So yesterday, well, it was yesterday to me. I don't know when you're watching this, but anyway, in the previous lecture, we were talking about the biosphere. So I was kind of like looking at things from the global perspective. And today we're gonna be kind of taking it one step more zoomed in, and we're going to be looking at ecosystems. So ecosystems is basically the abiotic and the biotic factors taken together. So you have your organisms that live in a certain community, in a certain area, and the abiotic factors. So that's your climate, the ground, the water, and the sunlight, and stuff like that. And you're kind of looking at how do the biotic factors interact with the abiotic factors. So the two really important dynamics that you want to look at in an ecosystem is energy and nutrients. So in this diagram, your energy is coming from the sun. So that's where the earth gets all of its energy from. And what's important about energy is that energy flows in only one direction. So once an energy transaction has happened, it can't go backwards. You can't give energy back to the sun. The sun's not going to take it. Once the energy goes from the sun to, a plant on the earth, and that plant absorbs some of that sun energy, it keeps going forward, and eventually it's going to leave the earth in the form of heat. So energy only goes in one direction. Nutrients, on the other hand, they go in a cycle. So if you can see this, the brown arrows, that's forming a circle, that's how nutrients are going to flow. They're just going to keep moving from the biotic factors, which are your plants and animals, and they're going to move to, they're eventually going to move to the abiotic reservoirs, which is like the dirt or the air or the water, and then somehow get back to the plants, which will then pass on the nutrients to animals, and it keeps going in that circle. So you see that in our the little brown arrow circle, we have photoautotrophs on top. Those are your plants. Basically, anything that's going to be able to produce energy anything that's going to be able to produce its own food, and it takes nutrients and it passes them off to heterotrophs. Those are like us and other animals, basically organisms that can't make their own food. So in this picture, we kind of have, we see this sort of hierarchy in an ecosystem. So if we start at the very bottom, we have the sun. So the sun is what's going to power everything. And the sun is passing its energy to primary producers. That's your plants, because they're the only organisms, they're not always called plants. But anyway, your primary producers, the only organisms that can take sunlight and turn it into its own food. There's a siren outside. I don't know if you can hear it. I hope it's not disturbing anything. Okay. So primary producers, they're gonna get energy from the sun, and then that energy is gonna be passed along to the things that eat the plants, and then that energy is gonna be passed along to the things that eat the herbivores, and so on. And then you see that there's kind of these like red, like squiggly arrows that are leaving each box in our little hierarchy. That red squiggle is representing heat that is leaving every time energy is being passed along. So eventually all that energy, you see that like the fat orange or red arrow from the sun, eventually all that energy that came from the sun gets balanced by heat that is leaving the earth from the different levels of this hierarchy. So energy is moving this way in one direction. But the blue arrows are going to show our nutrients cycling. So we see that we'll start with the primary producers, which is the green box. The primary producers, they are passing some nutrients onto the primary consumers, which is the orange box, because you can see that the arrow going from primary producers to primary consumers is like half red, half blue. So it's passing some energy and some nutrients. When an herbivore eats the plant, they're getting some nutrients from the plant. But you also see that there's also like a large blue arrow that's just leaving each box, and it's kind of forming this outer like ring or circle, oval, and that is representing that eventually plants, animals, everyone dies, and when a living organism becomes dead, it is then going to be broken down by decomposers. So the decomposers, they are the gray box here, and the decomposers, they're going to connect the blue oval that's kind of circling around the outside, and it really connects the cycle of nutrients being able to flow from the biotic reservoirs into the abiotic reservoirs, because all the nutrients that are inside like plants or animals or whatnot, and by nutrients, like this could be like carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, stuff like that. All the atoms that are making up the plant body, the atoms that are making up the animal body. When those things die, if nobody could decompose those bodies, first of all, it'd be a problem, because then you just have dead bodies everywhere forever. But the other problem is that you would never be able to get back those nutrients. Basically, the nutrient would be used once, and then it wouldn't be able to be used ever again, and that would deplete all the nutrients available in the earth very quickly. So decomposers, they're going to break down the once living organisms, and that allows the atoms and the nutrients that made up those once living organisms to be cycled back into either like the earth or the air or the water, so that it can once again become available to the primary producers, which they're gonna start the food chain all over again. So that's why decomposition is really important, even though most of it goes kind of unnoticed. And without decomposition, we would not survive, because it connects the nutrient cycle. Examples of your decomposers are things like fungi, like if you've ever been walking in the woods and you've seen like mushrooms kind of like growing all over a log or something like that. So that would be fungi in the process of decomposing that log. A lot of your decomposers tend to be prokaryotes too, little bacteria and stuff. Okay, so we're going to kind of zoom in on, you can see this sort of pyramid in this picture with the green, orange, blue, and purple box. So that makes up a food chain. And in a food chain, you see, we'll start with we'll just look at the left. The left, starting from the bottom going up, you have a flower. The flower is eaten by the grasshopper is eaten by, I think that's a mouse. And then the mouse is eaten by a snake, and then the snake is eaten by a hawk. So The flower is your producer. The primary consumer, the grasshopper, is your herbivore. Mouse is your secondary consumer. That is your first carnivore. And then you got tertiary consumer, quaternary consumer, and by then they're all carnivores. Notice that the energy is really only going in one direction. It doesn't cycle around like nutrients. The energy starts with the flower absorbs energy from the sun, and that energy gets passed on to grasshopper, gets passed on to mouse, and passed on to snake, and then hawk. I think it's a hawk. And this is our food chain. And most food chains are going to stop around your tertiary consumer, maybe your quaternary consumer. You don't really see food chains that have too many levels in it. And you can think about why that might be the case. We'll get to it later on in the PowerPoint, but yeah, food chains cannot be sustained indefinitely for many levels. But if the food chain was just one chain by itself, this is actually not very what's the word I'm looking for? Like if you removed any animal from this chain, then you kind of disrupt the entire, you disrupt the whole trophic structure, the whole hierarchy. And so that's why you don't really see chains that are just kind of in isolation like this. You really see food webs. And it's made of many chains kind of linked together because, a hawk does not only eat snakes, it might eat other things as well. I think hawks even eat mice. So like, an organism eats multiple things, and a prey organism can be eaten by multiple things. So in this example, our primary producer is phytoplankton here at the very bottom of the chain, or at the bottom of the food web, sorry. And the phytoplankton can be eaten by krill and this other thing, copepod. And, they can be eaten by plankton or birds or squid or fish. And then you kind of keep going up and you keep crisscrossing throughout the web. Different carnivores can eat different animals. And then you have this really, kind of complicated looking web with lots of connections. And it's important to have a lot of connections in this kind of web like this, and because basically if you have like multiple animals can feed one animal that's next in the web, then you kind of have some resilience. So let's say the squid disappears here for whatever reason. Maybe the squid's got, I don't know, like the plural of squid, whatever. The squid got hunted to extinction and they disappeared. Well, if we only had like a chain like this, then that would be a really big problem, because then whatever animal is depending on eating the squid is going to not have its food and it's going to die off. But when you have a food web like this, even if you lose the squid, that's okay, because the elephant seal may not be able to eat squid, but the elephant seal can still eat fish. That's not to say that animals or organisms going extinct is okay, because if the elephant seal can't eat the squid, then it kind of puts more pressure on the fish population, and then it's going to start competing with the leopard seal for fish, right? So then you start getting increased competition. But the idea here is that the more diversity you have in the food web, then it won't get as heavily disrupted if you have changes in populations. And then everybody survives better. Okay, this was just going through. Okay, so these arrows are basically just are representing that you take away the squid, and while the elephant seal can eat other things, so it's not gonna totally be in trouble, but because it's now competing with the leopard seal, both of their populations are going to decrease a bit because now they're competing for the same resource. And obviously the fish population is going to go down by a lot more because the double the amount of fish are being eaten because there's no squid. But if the fish population goes down, that means there's not as much fish to eat the carnivorous plankton, so the carnivorous plankton might go up. And this will eventually kind of affect the, whatever is below the next level in the in the food web, because then more phytoplankton is being eaten. So really what this is showing is that small changes in a food web can have like a lot of different effects, but the more diversity that you have in the food web can just sort of dampen out the effect, so it's not too harsh of a consequence. Okay, so now we're going to talk about primary production. Primary production is really what's going to be kind of creating the energy budget for any ecosystem. So primary production, it's the amount of solar energy that's converted into chemical energy, or you can think of it, and primary production is only going to be done by your producers, your plants, basically. So the amount of sunlight, let's say, that a plant absorbs and then turns into chemical energy through photosynthesis, that's how much energy you have to start with for the entire ecosystem, because your producers make up the very bottom of your food web, and so they're really supporting. They really determine how much energy there is to go around to support all the other organisms higher up in the food web. So you have gross and net primary production. Gross means like total energy converted, but the plant does have to use some of that energy, for keeping the plant alive and cellular respiration and stuff like that. So net primary production is really the energy in the plant that's left over for whoever eats the plant. And net primary production is really more of an important measure for how much energy is there going to be for the rest of the food chain, food web. Okay, so this is a lot of stuff happening in this graph. This is basically on the, well, I guess the words kind of got smushed together a bit, but on the very left of these three graphs, you see kind of different biomes, and the blue bar graphs represent water. The green bar graphs represent land biomes. So starting with the middle, we'll start with the left. The left graph is showing, or the left bar graph is showing, how much of the Earth's surface is taken up with this particular biome. You can see that the ocean is by far the largest biome. And I think, I don't know, maybe like lakes, streams I think algal beds were maybe the smallest biome. And then in the middle graph is showing how productive is a biome for, a given area of land or water. How productive is that biome? And you can see that while the ocean does have the largest biome, it's not like square footage for square footage. The ocean is not as productive as, let's say, the rainforest. I don't know if you can really see it that well, but the green bar graph, that is the longest, that's the rainforest. And so the rainforest is actually extremely productive. And then this light blue graph at the light blue bar at the bottom, that would be your, you really can't see that because the words are all smushed together, but that is your wetlands. So wetlands are super productive. And then the third graph, bar graph, is showing, what percentage of the Earth's net primary production comes from each biome. And you can see that the ocean makes up a lot of the Earth's net primary production, but that's really due to the fact that the ocean is the largest biome out there. But the rainforest, it doesn't take as much land as, it doesn't take up as much percentage of the Earth's surface area, but it still makes up a lot of the Earth's net primary production. That's how you know it's a really productive biome. One of the most productive biomes. Okay, so primary production, we want to think about what are the limits to primary production. What stops it from happening as often? Well, that would be light, for sure, because photosynthesis depends on light. Or this is talking about marine biomes in particular. So primary production in marine biomes, like the oceans, your lakes, your estuaries, and coral reefs and stuff like that. So what they found was that scientists, they did an experiment and they were kind of mapping productivity around the globe. And, they originally suspected that, well, because you need light for photosynthesis, maybe the areas of the world that have the most light should have the most productivity. That would be your equator, right? The brightest parts of the planet. But they actually found that there were some areas of the world that were more productive than in the ocean, more productive than around the equator, and even an area that was kind of near the South Pole happened to be more productive than than the marine biomes in the equator. And they were wondering, why is that? And it turned out, so what you can see in this graph is it's sort of mapping as you go deeper into the ocean, deeper into the water. That's the y-axis. It's kind of mapping how much of a certain nutrient that you might have. So you have phosphate, nitrate, chlorophyll, and what you see is that, or what this is really showing you is that you get a lot of sunlight at the top of the surface, like the surface of the ocean, but your nutrients tend to be more concentrated towards the bottom of the ocean, particularly where the light doesn't penetrate anymore. So that's kind of a problem, because you have light, but you don't have nutrients at the top. And then at the bottom, you don't have light, but you have nutrients. So because these scientists saw that, there's like an area near the South Pole that that is, has more productivity, more net productivity than, around the equator, there's got to be something else that, there's got to be another factor that's just as important as light for primary production, and that would be nutrients. So to solve this problem of, sometimes you have light at the surface of the ocean, but your nutrients are down here, and where your nutrients are, light might not be able to penetrate. If you recall back in the previous lecture, we talked about how lakes have turnover in the spring and fall, so that the nutrients and the oxygen get mixed around. In the ocean, that's called upwelling. So you have upwelling more frequently in certain areas of the ocean, and around the South Pole happens to be a lot of upwelling, so that you have a lot of mixing of the water, and the nutrients at the bottom of the water, they get mixed to the top, and so then you have more frequency of having light and nutrients together, so that you can have the primary production by your photosynthetic organisms. So marine systems, they depend on light and nutrients. Not really. Marine systems don't really depend. Water is not really a limiting factor, because they're water biomes, so there's water everywhere. But for one more thing to talk about. So in freshwater, there can be a problem if you have too much nutrients in the water, like in a lake or something. So if you put too many nutrients, like nitrogen and phosphorus particularly, into like a lake, then what happens is called eutrophication, and basically there's going to be a massive amount of primary production in the form of algae blooming. And while that sounds like it would be a good thing that you have all this production happening, if you have too much of it too much of it happening too quickly, it actually ends up causing a lot of the other plants and animals to die off, because algae is kind of taking over everywhere. So then other plants kind of get choked out, and so then you lose other plants, and then you have all that, the decomposition of those plants. So then a lot of decomposition is happening, and then decomposition is going to use up the oxygen in that body of water. So then you start to lose oxygen, from your lake or whatever it is, and then the fish are going to die because they don't have enough oxygen. So eutrophication is actually not a good thing. It causes life in lakes to die, or life in that body of water to die. So this actually happens. Oh gosh, I think there's a fire truck outside. Okay, this actually can happen in areas where you have like sewage with pollution running off into the water, because it will be rich in like nitrogen or phosphorus or something, and then that causes these algal blooms, which cause fish to die off, which isn't good. So too much productivity happening and not in balance is not a good thing either. Everything in this earth is really about keeping a balance. You don't want to swing too far in any direction. Okay, so those marine biomes, so their production depends on light and nutrients. And land biomes, it's still light and nutrients that's important, but you also have the limiting factor of moisture, right? Like deserts, they don't grow a lot of, deserts aren't too productive because there's not a lot of precipitation, there's not a lot of moisture, so not that many plants can grow everywhere. And whereas rainforests, they're like one of the most productive biomes out there, and they get a lot of precipitation, a lot of moisture, and that allows them to be really productive. So the plants can be really productive and support a really diverse, robust food web. Okay. The last thing we're going to talk about is secondary production. So primary production would be the plants taking energy from the sun and then turning that into energy that can be passed on to the next layer in the food web. Secondary production is going to be, the first herbivore that's eating the plant and taking the energy from the plant, or absorbing energy from the plant, and then having energy that can be passed on to the first carnivore. But, so if you recall, when I was talking about food webs, that food chains, they don't go on very long, maybe only about 3 or 4 levels, because energy transfer is not an efficient process. So if we're looking at this caterpillar is eating a leaf, and let's say the caterpillar or the plant had, or the caterpillar ate 200 joules. Joules is a unit of energy. Caterpillar ate 200 joules worth of energy. Well, half of that is just leaving as poop, but then the rest of it, the caterpillar needs some of that energy to just stay alive, so via cellular respiration, and then that energy is going to leave as heat once cellular respiration takes place. So then it only leaves a little bit amount left for new biomass, which would be like growth. And it's this new biomass, the energy that's used for new biomass, that is really looked at for what is possible to pass on to the next consumer if you kind of go up the food chain. So this is an energy pyramid, and so the very bottom yellow strip, that would be the sun. So let's say that this flower, it absorbed 100,000 joules from the sun. The grasshopper that eats it, the grasshopper is going to absorb some energy from the plant that it eats. It's only about 10,000, let's just say, in an ideal scenario, 10,000 joules of energy. That's 10% of what the plant had. And then the next animal that's going to eat the grasshopper, the mouse, it also gets 10% of whatever the grasshopper had. So as you keep going up the food chain and transferring energy, as some organism consumes another organism, the energy transfer is roughly 10% in an ideal scenario. And that's just showing you really how inefficient energy transfer is. A lot of it is, lost in cellular respiration, heat, and the organism has to stay alive too. The plant can't pass all of its energy that it absorbs off to the next consumer. So you have energy that's being used for cellular respiration, and only a little bit is passed on to each new level of the food chain. And so that's why food chains can't sustain too many levels, because 10% of 10% of 10%, and then you're barely getting anything if you keep adding layers on top. Yeah, that's why they're pretty much 4 or 5 levels. Biomass pyramids is another way of looking at. You could either have energy pyramids or biomass pyramids. They usually show the same thing. The top pyramid is showing kind of like how much what is the standing weight of a group of organisms at each level of the food chain. So you can see that in the top pyramid, the plants they have the most mass, most biomass. There's a lot of plants everywhere because you need to have a lot of plants to support the animals that are going to eat the plants. And then there's an even fewer amount of secondary consumers and even fewer amount of tertiary consumers. So biomass tends to decrease as you go further up the pyramid, because usually a consumer is bigger than the thing that they are eating. So because they have a bigger mass and they need to eat a lot of whatever it is that they're consuming to make up for the inefficient energy transfer, then you end up having less. The ecosystem can't support too much of the next level up in the food chain. So in our example here, the snake eating the mouse, because the snake is only getting 10% of the energy that the mouse has, the snake needs to eat several mice in order to have the same amount of energy that the mouse once had. And so that's why you generally need to have more mass of the lower level of the pyramid. I don't know if that was kind of confusing. If that was confusing, we'll go over it later in the lesson. Occasionally, though, you have upside down biomass pyramids. That would be your bottom pyramid, where you have a very small amount of primary producers and a much larger amount of primary consumers. And you generally find that maybe in marine biomes, and that is because the primary producers, phytoplankton in this case, they reproduce so fast. Their turnover rate is so fast that they can handle. They reproduce and then they get eaten, and then they reproduce again and get eaten. So you don't really accumulate, but because their turnover rate is so fast, they can still support. The zooplankton that's more plentiful than the phytoplankton. Okay, no, we're gonna stop there, because the next lecture is gonna be about nutrient cycling. So today was about energy, and then tomorrow or whenever the next day is going to be about nutrients. Okay. All right, so that was it. I know it was supposed to be kind of like a Monday, Wednesday, Friday thing, not a Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday for lectures, but Monday happened to be a work day for teachers, so a non-school day for you, even though every day is kind of a non-school day for you. So sorry if it was kind of back to back lectures and stuff like that. But yeah, this one was a bit shorter. I know the last one was kind of long. Sorry about that. Okay, so I hope you have a nice rest of your day whenever you see this. Sal's gonna say hi and bye to you. Maybe I'll show you a different friend in the next video. Okay, so I'll see you guys later.